The snow had been falling on Detroit for 2 days without stopping, the kind of heavy, relentless snow that turned the city quiet and erased the difference between the sidewalk and the street. Serena Colby stood outside the emergency entrance of St. Michael's Hospital with her daughter pressed against her side and nothing in her hands except a plastic bag that held everything they had left in the world. Mattie was 7 years old, and she had stopped asking questions 3 days ago. That was the thing that scared Serena most. Not the cold, not the bag, not the fact that they had nowhere to go. It was the silence from a little girl who used to narrate everything, who used to provide running commentary on clouds and caterpillars and the exact shade of the sky at 4 in the afternoon. Mattie had gone quiet the way children go quiet when they understand that something is very wrong, and that asking about it will only make it more real. The hospital had kept Mattie for 2 nights after the accident. A car had run a red light on Woodward Avenue and clipped the taxi they were riding in, and Mattie had hit her head against the window hard enough to scare everyone. The doctors had monitored her, run tests, kept her under observation. And for 2 nights, Serena had slept in a chair beside her daughter's bed and pretended that everything was fine, that they had a home to return to, that the eviction notice she had tucked into the bottom of that plastic bag did not say what it said. She had been a pharmacist's assistant at the same drugstore on Cass Avenue for 4 years. She had been good at her job, careful and meticulous, the kind of person who triple-checked dosages and remembered the names of regular customers' grandchildren. The store had been sold in October to a chain that brought in its own staff. She had been given 2 weeks' notice and a handshake. Her landlord had given her 60 days. She had spent those 60 days believing something would work out, applying for jobs that did not call back, eating through the small savings account she had built dollar by dollar over 4 years. Now it was January, and the savings were gone, and the apartment was someone else's, and she was standing outside a hospital in the snow with her quiet daughter and a plastic bag. A security guard came out to check on them. He was a big man with a kind face, and he looked at them the way people look at things that break their hearts a little. He told her she could not stay on the steps, that there was a shelter on Michigan Avenue, that he was sorry. Serena thanked him and picked up the bag and took Mattie's hand and walked back out into the snow, because what else do you do? The shelter was full. The woman at the desk was apologetic and exhausted in equal measure. She wrote down 2 other addresses on a piece of paper and pressed it into Serena's hand. Both of those were full, too. They ended up in the covered parking structure on Grand River, on the 4th level where the cameras did not work and the wind could not reach. Serena made a nest out of the contents of the bag, a coat for Mattie to sit on, the 2 sweaters layered together for warmth. She bought crackers and hot chocolate from the vending machine on level 2, and they ate dinner like it was a picnic, like it was something they had chosen. Mattie drank her hot chocolate and looked at Serena with those serious brown eyes and said, "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" And Serena said yes, with a certainty she did not feel, because that is what mothers do. They say yes, even when the word tastes like a lie. They say yes because the alternative is a 7-year-old learning that her mother has no idea what comes next. She did not sleep that night. She sat with her back against the concrete pillar and watched the snow drift past the open edge of the parking level and thought about every decision that had led her here. Some of them were mistakes. Some of them were just bad luck wearing the costume of mistakes. It was hard to tell the difference from the inside. At some point in the early morning, a black car pulled up to the 4th level. Serena tensed, pulling Mattie closer. 2 men got out, neither of them in uniform. They were looking for something, or someone, and when the taller one's flashlight swept in her direction and found her, she braced herself for whatever came next. The man lowered the flashlight immediately. "Sorry," he said, and his voice was calm, not threatening. "We did not mean to startle you." The other man hung back. The first one, the one who had spoken, crouched down to her level, with the easy caution of someone trained to approach frightened people. He was perhaps 40, with dark eyes and the kind of face that had absorbed a great deal of the world without flinching. He wore a suit under his coat, and he looked deeply out of place on the 4th level of a parking structure at 3 in the morning. "My name is Gideon," he said. "I work security for the building across the street. We do rounds up here sometimes. I want you to know you are not in trouble." Serena studied him for a long moment. She had learned to read faces quickly in the past months. This man was not performing kindness. He was simply being it. "We will be gone in the morning," she said. Gideon looked at the little girl asleep against Serena's shoulder. He looked at the plastic bag and the makeshift nest and the 2 paper cups that had held hot chocolate. Something moved across his face that he did not try to hide. "Hold on," he said. He straightened up and walked back to the second man and spoke to him quietly. The second man made a phone call. Serena watched all of this and could not decide whether to run or wait. Running meant waking Matty. Waiting meant trusting strangers. She waited. Gideon came back. "My employer would like to offer you somewhere warm to sleep tonight," he said. "You and your daughter. A real room. A real bed. There's a kitchen. We can have food brought in." He paused. "I know that sounds strange. I know you have no reason to trust this. If you say no, we walk away and no one bothers you again. But it is very cold, and she—" He glanced at Matty. "She has been through something recent. I can see the hospital bracelet." Serena looked down at her daughter's wrist. She had forgotten about the bracelet. She thought about the shelter that was full, the steps she could not sit on, the vending machine crackers. She thought about what her own face looked like when she had told Matty yes, they would be okay, and the exact amount of certainty she had actually felt. "Who is your employer?" she asked. Gideon answered without hesitation. "His name is Conrad Sterling. He owns Sterling Development. The building across the street is his." She had seen the building. Everyone in this part of Detroit had seen it. 40 stories of glass and steel that had gone up in the past 3 years, the kind of building that announced itself with its own skyline. She knew the name Sterling the way you know the names of weather systems, not personally but by their effects. "Why?" she asked. "He saw you," Gideon said simply. "He was working late. He saw you from the window." Serena looked at her daughter. She looked at the concrete and the snow and the paper cups. "One night," she said. "We stay one night, and then we go." Gideon nodded. "Of course," he said. "One night." The room they were given was on the 42nd floor of the Sterling building, in a guest suite that overlooked the city. Serena stood at the window for a long time after Gideon left them, looking out at Detroit in the snow, at the lights in the dark, and the way the city looked like a different world from up here, ordered and luminous, nothing like the parking structure 4 levels up. Matty found the bathroom and discovered the deep soaking tub and turned to her mother with the first real expression she had shown in days. "Can I?" she asked. "Yes," Serena said, and this time the word was true. She ran a bath for Matty and sat on the edge of the tub and listened to her daughter narrate again, cataloguing the soap bottles by smell, deciding which one was best, building a story about a mermaid who lived in exactly this kind of tub. Serena let the sound of it wash over her like something medicinal. When Matty was asleep in the large bed, her dark hair fanned out on the white pillow, Serena sat in the chair by the window and let herself feel how tired she was. Real tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that comes not just from one bad night, but from 3 months of holding everything together by sheer force of will. She was still sitting there when a knock came at the door. She opened it to find a woman in her 50s with a warm, no-nonsense expression holding a tray of food. "I'm Patricia," the woman said, "Mr. Sterling's housekeeper. He thought you might not have eaten." She held out the tray, and Serena took it without speaking, because there was nothing to say, because the smell of it alone made her eyes burn. There was also a note on the tray, in handwriting that was quick and spare. "Rest. We can talk tomorrow if you want. If you want to leave instead, Gideon will drive you wherever you need to go. No obligation either way." C.S. Serena read it twice. Then she ate and went to sleep in the chair because she was not ready to lie down in someone else's bed, not yet. She met Conrad Sterling the next morning. He was taller than she expected, with silver at his temples, and the particular stillness of someone who was used to rooms waiting for him to speak. He was perhaps 45, with a face that had clearly been handsome when it was younger and was something more interesting now. He wore a grey sweater and dark pants, and he made coffee himself in the kitchen of the suite, which surprised her. "Milk?" he asked without turning around. "Please," she said. He set the mug in front of her and sat across the small table and looked at her the way people look when they are actually trying to understand something rather than performing understanding. "I had Gideon pull some information," he said, "about the parking structure, about what is available in terms of shelter. I know it is not my business, but I wanted to know what you were actually dealing with before we talked." Serena wrapped both hands around the mug. And it is worse than I realized," he said. "The shelter situation in January is," he paused, "not what it should be." "No," Serena agreed, "it isn't." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not going to insult you by pretending I don't have the resources to help. I know what I have. I also know that people in difficult circumstances are offered help in ways that aren't actually helpful all the time, and that it can do more damage than good." He set down his mug. "So I want to ask you directly, what do you actually need?" No one had asked her that in 3 months. People had told her what was available, what she qualified for, what she should apply for. No one had asked what she actually needed. She told him the truth. She needed stable housing for long enough to get a job. She needed someone to watch Matty after school while she worked. She needed to stop spending all her mental energy on survival, so that she had some left over for the job search itself. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she might read from a chart. because that was the only way she could say it without her voice breaking. Conrad Sterling listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once, slowly. "I have a building," he said, 3 blocks from here. I renovated it last year. The ground floor is commercial, the upper floors are residential. There is a unit on the 3rd floor that I keep available for situations like yours." He looked at her. "I want to be honest about what that means. I'm not a charity. I don't do this as charity. I do it because I grew up in a building a lot like a parking structure on the east side of this city, and someone opened a door for me once, and I have never stopped thinking about what would have happened if they hadn't." Serena looked at him. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Reduced rent, which you can pay back if you choose to and not if you don't." He paused. "I am looking for someone to manage the front desk of this building. Scheduling, coordination, some client contact. The salary is competitive, the hours are regular, and the building has an after-school program on the 6th floor. Serena stared at him. "You're offering me a job if you want it," he said. "I know what your background is. I know you're detail-oriented and capable. I'd be getting a good employee out of this, not doing you a favor." She looked at this man who had seen her from a window in a snowstorm and had done this, had thought it through, had arrived at breakfast with a real offer instead of a pamphlet. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course," he said. He stood and picked up both mugs and carried them to the sink. "Stay as long as you need to. Mattie is welcome in the after-school program starting today if she'd like. There are other kids." He glanced toward the bedroom door. She looked like she could use some other kids. Serena looked at the bedroom door too. She thought about Mattie's silence, about the hot chocolate, about the mermaid story in the bathtub. "Yes," she said, for the 3rd time in 12 hours. But this time the word was not a performance. It was a decision. She started the job the following Monday. The front desk of Sterling Development's building turned out to be the most complicated organizational puzzle she had ever encountered, and she loved it immediately. There were contractors and architects and legal teams and property managers flowing in and out all day, and everything that touched the building eventually came through her desk, and she discovered that her years of managing pharmaceutical inventory and patient schedules had given her exactly the right mind for it. The apartment on the 3rd floor of the other building was smaller than it looked in photographs, but felt enormous compared to anything Serena had occupied in the past months. Mattie chose the bedroom with the window that faced east, so she could watch the sun come up. She started narrating again within 4 days. By the end of the first week, she had opinions about the after-school program's art supplies and had already made a best friend named Olivia and was lobbying for a fish. Serena watched her daughter become a child again and felt something in her own chest begin to unknot, slowly, one thread at a time. Conrad Sterling came to the front desk on Tuesday afternoons, ostensibly to review the week's building traffic with her. Actually, she suspected, to check that everything was going all right. He was not obvious about it. He asked real questions about real operational matters, and then listened to the answers with the full attention of someone who considered information a valuable thing. She learned about him in pieces the way you learn about people you see every day. Not from what they say directly, but from the gaps between things. That he had grown up poor on the east side, that his mother had worked 2 jobs and still not made it out of debt before she died. That he had built Sterling Development from a single renovation project that almost bankrupted him. That he had a reputation in the city for being hard and exacting and fair in that order, which most people found acceptable if not warm. That the emergency unit in the 3rd floor apartment and the reduced rents scattered through his properties were not advertised anywhere, were not part of his public image, were just something he did. She told him about the pharmacy job loss over coffee one Tuesday. She told him about her ex-husband, Mattie's father, who had been pleasant and unreliable in that particular combinations that feels like stability until it suddenly doesn't, who had moved to Atlanta 2 years ago with a new girlfriend and called on holidays if he remembered. Conrad listened. He did not offer analysis or solutions. He just received what she said and held it, which was better. "Mattie's father," he said, after a pause. "Is he in touch?" "Inconsistently," Serena said, "which is almost harder than not at all." Conrad nodded. "My father was inconsistent," he said. "I know what that costs." She looked at him across the table, at the careful set of his face and the way he said it not for sympathy but because it was true. 6 weeks after she started, Mattie's school called. There had been a problem at pickup. A man had come to the school, had told the office he was Mattie's uncle, had asked to take her home. The school had called Serena before releasing Mattie, which was the correct procedure, and Mattie was fine, safe with the assistant principal waiting. But the man had given a name Serena recognized. Derek Voss, her ex-husband's brother, a man she had spoken to exactly once at a tense Christmas dinner 4 years ago. A man who had looked at her like she was an inconvenience that had not yet been properly categorized. She left the building at a run. Conrad was coming out of the elevator when she crossed the lobby. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" It was not a question. She told him in short sentences while they walked to the car she had hailed on her phone. He listened. He did not tell her everything would be fine. He said, "Go get Matty. I'll find out what this is." "You don't have to, Serena." He said her name with that particular steadiness, the same tone he used when something in the building needed a clear decision. "Go get your daughter." She got her daughter. Matty was fine, sitting in the assistant principal's office with a juice box, describing the situation to a school counselor with a 7-year-old's unsettling accuracy. Serena held her in the hallway afterward for a long time and felt her heart rate come back down from somewhere in the stratosphere. When she got back to the building, Conrad was waiting in her office. He had a folder. "Derek Voss," he said, "works for your ex-husband's law firm, not as a lawyer, as a fixer. Roderick," that was the ex-husband, filed a motion last week to revisit the custody arrangement. Specifically, to establish that your current living situation makes you an unsuitable primary custodian. Serena felt the blood leave her face. "He knows where we are. He has been tracking you through Matty's school enrollment," Conrad said, "which is information he is technically entitled to as a co-parent." His jaw was set. "He is trying to use the months of housing instability against you in court. The parking structure, the shelters." The room felt very small and very cold. "I can't lose her," Serena said. The words came out in a voice she didn't recognize. "She is all I have." Conrad set down the folder and came around the desk and stood in front of her. "Look at me," he said. She looked. "You are not going to lose her," he said. "You have been employed for 6 weeks at a documented salary. You have stable housing with a lease and a verifiable address. You have a 7-year-old who is enrolled in school, attending consistently, thriving by any observable measure." Roderick Voss walked away from his daughter and moved to Atlanta. "He is not going to win this." "So do I," Conrad said. "Better ones." She stared at him. "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its customary control. "Because Matty sat in that after-school program on the first day and she organized the other children into some kind of committee to write a letter to the program director about the art supply situation," he said. "Gideon told me. He thought it was funny." He paused. "I thought she was extraordinary, and so are you. And no one who has done what you have done for that child deserves to have it used against her." Serena felt her throat tighten. "And," Conrad said after a beat, "I find I am quite interested in what happens to you next." The custody hearing was 4 weeks later. Roderick Voss appeared via video from Atlanta, which the judge noted with the expression of a woman who had seen this particular maneuver before and found it unconvincing. His lawyers presented documentation of the housing instability. Conrad's lawyers presented 6 weeks of pay stubs, a lease, school attendance records, a letter from the after-school program director, and the original intake reports from the night. Gideon had found them in the parking structure, which had been filed correctly, which documented the exact circumstances with clinical precision. Serena sat in the courtroom and held herself very still and looked at the judge and answered every question in the clear, direct voice she had used when she was a pharmacist's assistant who triple-checked dosages. She did not perform distress. She did not apologize. She simply told the truth, which was that she had made it through an impossible stretch and come out on the other side. Conrad sat 2 rows behind her. She had told him he did not need to come. He had appeared anyway. The judge ruled in her favor. Full primary custody, standard visitation for Roderick, a note in the record that the attempt to use temporary housing instability as evidence of parental unfitness had been unpersuasive and frankly disheartening. Serena walked out of the courthouse into February sunshine, thin and cold and absolutely brilliant. Conrad was beside her on the steps. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "You did it," he said. "Your lawyers did it. Matty's committee letter probably didn't hurt." Serena laughed. It surprised her. She had forgotten that she laughed easily, that it used to be a thing she did without thinking about it. "We're getting a fish," she said. Conrad looked at her sideways. "Is that relevant?" "Matty has been campaigning. I told her when things settled down." "Things have settled down." He smiled. It transformed his face the same way sunlight transforms a room when it comes around the edge of a curtain. "What kind of fish?" "One that is difficult to kill," Serena said. "We are still rebuilding our track record." They walked to the car. Conrad opened the door for her with the ease of a reflex. She paused before getting in. "That thing you said," she started, "about being interested in what happens to me next." He looked at her steadily. "I feel the same way," she said, "about you." The expression that crossed his face then was not the composed, controlled expression she was used to. It was something quieter and more unguarded, something that looked like relief. "Good," he said. "That simplifies things considerably." Spring came to Detroit in its slow, reluctant way, and then all at once, the way springs do after hard winters. The trees on the block outside Serena's apartment building came back all in the same week, and Mattie stood at the east-facing window and provided full commentary. The fish was named Gerald. He was a better, blue and improbably dramatic for a creature living in a bowl, and he had survived 6 weeks, which Mattie considered a substantial achievement. Serena considered it a sign. She had been promoted at work, which was partly Conrad's doing and partly her own, and she had stopped mentally performing the calculus of rent versus groceries versus everything else that had occupied a significant portion of her brain for 3 months. The absence of that calculation left room for other things. She had started running again in the mornings, something she had not done since before the layoff. She had called an old friend from pharmacy school, who she had been too ashamed to contact during the bad months. She was becoming herself again. Not the self from before everything fell apart, but a newer version, one who knew what she was capable of when the world got narrow and cold, one who had held her daughter in a parking structure and said yes without knowing if it was true, and then had made it true through sheer stubbornness. Conrad had taken her to dinner 3 times, not to the kind of restaurant that required a reservation made 6 weeks in advance, but to small specific places he knew because he had eaten his way through the city for 20 years. A Korean barbecue place in Hamtramck where the owner argued with him pleasantly about the correct temperature for pork belly. A Yemeni coffee shop in Dearborn where the owners knew him by name, and the coffee was unlike anything she had ever tasted. A fish restaurant on the river where they had sat for 3 hours talking about, among other things, Gerald. She learned more about him on those evenings, about the East Side childhood, about the mother who had worked until her body gave out and died too young, about the first renovation project, a gutted commercial building in Corktown that he had poured everything into and nearly lost, about the way success had come and the way it had changed things, and the way some of those changes were not what he had expected. "I thought I would feel different," he said one evening on the river, "when it worked. I thought there would be a moment there wasn't. There was a moment when I realized I could stop counting," he said, "stop doing the math about whether I could afford dinner. That was real." He looked at the water. The rest of it happened so gradually, I almost missed it. Serena understood that. She had her own version of the math, the calculations that ran automatically in the background of your brain when you had spent long enough worrying about whether you had enough. "I still do it sometimes," she said. "The count you I," he said, "probably always will." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He looked down at their hands and then at her face with an expression that was entirely unguarded. "I don't have a lot of practice at this," he said. He paused, searching for the right word. "This, neither do I," she said. "We can figure it out." Summer arrived and the after-school program ended for the season, and Mattie spent the days at the building's community center with a rotating roster of other children, running projects that the staff regarded with a mixture of admiration and mild exhaustion. She had organized a garden on the rooftop, obtained funding for it from Conrad through a formal proposal she had written herself, in her own handwriting with a crayon border that she described as professional decoration. Conrad had funded the garden immediately. He had also kept the proposal in his desk, which Serena discovered one afternoon when she came into his office for a meeting, and saw it there, smoothed flat, crayon border and all. She did not say anything, but she stood there for a moment looking at it. He came in behind her and stopped when he saw where she was looking. "She made a compelling case," he said. "She really did," Serena agreed. He came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. They both looked at the proposal. "I keep thinking about January," he said, "about how close it was, how easily things could have gone differently." "I try not to," Serena said. "Think about that?" "No," he said. "I think about it because—" He paused. "Because I want to understand what it cost you, what those months cost. I don't want to take for granted what it means that you're here." She turned to look at him, at the way he held himself, at the practiced stillness that she had learned to read as something that had been built to cover a great deal of feeling. "Conrad," she said. He looked at her, she said. "We're here. That's what I want to take for granted, that we're here." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached up and brushed her cheek with his thumb, a gesture so quiet it was almost not a gesture at all. "Okay," he said. "I'll work on that." On an evening in late August, they were all 3 on the rooftop, in the garden that Mattie had organized into existence, watching the sun go down over Detroit. The sky was doing something extraordinary, streaks of orange and deep rose over the skyline, the river going gold in the distance. Matty had brought Gerald up in his bowl, which Serena was fairly certain was not recommended practice for better fish, but Gerald appeared unbothered, drifting in his dramatic blue way, unimpressed by the sunset. "He likes it up here," Matty said. "He cannot tell," Serena said. "He can tell," Matty said with certainty. Conrad, sitting on the low rooftop wall with his sleeves rolled up and his jacket somewhere, looked at Matty with an expression that Serena had come to recognize as the one he did not know he was making. "Matty," he said, "can I ask you something?" Matty looked at him with the full, measuring attention she gave to things she considered important. "Yes," she said. "Is this okay?" he said. "The three of us, here, like this." Matty looked at him. She looked at her mother. She looked at Gerald. She appeared to conduct some internal evaluation process that lasted approximately 4 seconds. "Yes," she said. "Can we come up here more?" "Yes," Conrad said. "We can come up here whenever you want." Matty nodded, satisfied, and turned back to Gerald and began narrating the sunset to him in a tone that suggested he was lucky to have someone to explain it. Serena looked at Conrad. "He was already a thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For the coffee, for the folder, for the lawyers, for the proposal in the desk, for all of it, for understanding what was actually needed and trying to give it, for asking Matty before assuming. For all of it," she said. He reached over and took her hand, and they sat like that as the sun finished setting, and the city lights came on one by one below them, and Matty narrated the whole thing to Gerald, who drifted in his bowl and probably did not understand a word of it, and was there anyway.